And now DeHaan will come up to the podium and talk to us about Kernza, as well as the perennial wheat program. Shuin Wang, who directs the perennial wheat program here at the Land Institute, had to leave on a family emergency, and so Lee is going to cover Shuin's crop here. So, Lee.
All right, so my work at the Land Institute actually started as the perennial wheat project, and that was my main thing to work on up until 2010. The intermediate wheatgrass, or Kernza as we've named it, started to get really successful, so we brought on Shuin to take over for the last several years. He's kind of continued where I started, and Shuin's had some unique insights. I kind of want to report on those. He's also continued to send out a lot of seed to other countries. So we now have sent seed to at least 10 other countries, perhaps more, at about 20 locations or more around the world. So perennial wheat germplasm is being evaluated, and we're hoping to, as Stan said, find ways that it might fit into local systems and find people who will continue to breed it for those environments. Shuin and I agree that after decades of research, it's frustrating to find that the hybrids between perennial grasses and wheat that we call perennial wheat really isn't perennial in Kansas. In fact, in stressful environments, or most environments, it tends to not live more than a few years and decline rapidly. And because of this, we've come to the conclusion that we can't keep doing the same thing we've been trying before. We've worked on perennial wheat since the 30s, not us, but somebody has, for many decades, and really haven't broken through this problem of perenniality. So Shuin kind of started dissecting this. So what is it about the summer that kills it? You plant winter wheat or perennial wheat here in the fall, and then it lives right through the winter, no problem. Flowers, makes a nice crop, and then we can't get it through the summer. So what is it about the summer? He tried giving it more water, so just watering it all summer long. It still dies. We tried keeping it cooler with some mulch on the surface. It still ended up dying. But then he tried one more thing, which was really brilliant, which is planting it in the spring and seeing if it dies then. And if you plant it in the spring, it doesn't head, and yet it lives right through the summer perfectly happy. So it's not the heat or the drought that's killing it. It's something else. And so we begin to think it's actually the program the plant has. And it's the part of that program that's coming from the annual wheat gene. So these hybrids have much of the chromosomes come from wheat, and many come from the perennial grasses. Maybe those wheat ones are essentially dominant, and they have a program which induces them to flower, and then, unfortunately, induces them to continue to flower. So if you look at most perennial cool season grasses, like you might have in your lawn or on the roadside, they'll flower once in the spring, and then you mow them off, or they stay there. They don't keep on flowering all summer long. And we think this is key. So the perennial wheat, almost all the lines, even the very best ones developed around the world, seem to have this problem. We fortunately found a few types that came out of some of my work before Shuin arrived here that actually do go back to being dormant. So we're curious about what is driving those. We'll be studying those carefully. Shuin will. And we're also looking at intermediate wheatgrass itself. We're trying to study the genetics of the perennial grass to say, well, how does it know to stop flowering all summer long? What's the cue it's using, or what key piece is different between wheat and this perennial grass that, obviously the wheat doesn't need to sense that it has to go back to being vegetative because it just dies. So that's a piece that wheat has lost, and so we need to figure out how to bring that back in. All right, so I'm going to transition from that perennial wheat piece to the Kernza breeding. Kernza is our name for intermediate wheatgrass, or Thinopyrum intermedium, which is a perennial grass, came from the same region as wheat originally. And we've been breeding it here since about 2003, and have made good progress. We've about doubled the seed size and the yield in that time. And since Shuin got here, I've donated my full-time work to this project. The exciting things over the past year have centered around projects or products that are in development. We have a couple of companies that are working on products to develop out of intermediate wheatgrass. We had our first commercial planting this fall under contract with one of these companies in northern Minnesota. The perennial grass seed growers northern Minnesota are very well experienced in growing perennial grasses, so we thought we'd start there with them. And since then, we've really realized that if we're close enough that we can start actually producing products, farmers growing grain, we have a lot of unanswered questions. If the genetics are coming along far enough, we need to answer questions like, what kind of soil fertility is needed? Can we graze it at different times of the year? What's the quality of the forage for grazing? What crops can be intercropped with it, perhaps to provide nitrogen fixation? So really, before we rush ahead at a big scale, we realize that there's some really key questions that need to be answered. Also, the breeding work is far from done. Our yields are still maybe a fifth to a quarter of comparable perennial or annual small grains. So there's a lot of work to be done there. Surprisingly, the great thing we can see about current is that even though the yields are low, it's relatively easy to grow once it's established, and therefore, even before we have the yields exactly like the annual grain, we hope that it will be economically viable, and we find that there's companies interested, and we hope consumers interested in buying a very sustainable grain. I hope that you'll sample the bread, which is made partially from Kernza, that was sold in the bookstore. They're all out, I know now, but to be given to you at dinner tonight. I hope you enjoy it. Thanks.